Good morning. It's good to be back in Oklahoma. I was in Tennessee. It's always good to be home. Come home to the 30-mile-an-hour winds. There we go. When I was with you last, we reflected on a flight that had taken off from LaGuardia to Dallas. LaGuardia has been in the news this week, unfortunately. But the story was about a Southwest plane that happened. This issue happened in 2018. And I found about the story because I told you last time that I enjoy listening to air traffic control stories of when there's an emergency, how the pilots respond to emergencies, because it's high stakes when you're in an airplane 30-some thousand feet in the air. So here, Tammy Jo is piloting this plane from New York to Dallas, and I wanted to, actually this time, last time I just kind of told you the story, this time we're actually going to, Caleb's going to cue the video, and we're going to actually listen to Tammy Jo, excerpts of her air traffic control audio as she's going through this catastrophic emergency where a part of the plane is blown off because of the engine blowing off. The cowling has come off the engine. It's caused some damage to the fuselage. And she's trying to get this plane down safely. And here's the audio from that encounter.
1380 has an engine fire descending.
Southwest 1380, you're descending right now?
Yes, sir, we're single engine descending, have a fire number 1.
Alright, Southwest 1380, okay, where would you like to go to? Which airport?
We're looking at Philly.
Southwest 1380. I understand your emergency. Let me know when you want to go in.
Yeah, we have a part of the aircraft missing, so we're going to need to slow down a bit.
Southwest 1380, speed is your discretion. Maintain at any altitude above 3,000 feet, and you let me know when you want to turn base.
All right, down to 3,000, Southwest 1380, like to start turning inbound.
Southwest 1380, just start turning southbound there. There's a Southwest 737 on a 4-mile final. We'll be turning southbound. Start looking for the airport. It's off to your right and slightly behind you there. And altitude is your discretion. Use caution for the downtown area. Advise you maintain at above 2,200 for the MVA.
Okay, could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
Injured passengers, okay. And is your airplane physically on fire?
No, it's not on fire, but part of it's missing. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out? Southwest 1380, it doesn't matter. We'll work it out there. So the airport's just off to your right. Report it in sight, please.
Southwest 1380, airport's in sight.
Southwest 1380, runway 27 left, clear to land. Southwest 1380, right turn when you're able. You want to stop wherever you need to is fine.
Thank you. We're going to stop right here by the fire truck. Thanks, guys, for the help.
How many of you could have been that cool and chill as you wing a wounded plane down from 30-some thousand feet, knowing she knew probably some of what was going on, probably not all that was going on to the plane, and yet she sounded like she was taking her dog for a walk. I find that interesting. I enjoy listening to those encounters because it's emulating what high-pressure situations do to people who have a lot of training and a lot of preparation. And that's what pilots do, thank goodness. And so it's fascinating to learn about the type of emergency preparation that goes into being a pilot. And so we also referenced last time this idea, there's a 500-page quick reference handbook that a pilot has to kind of go through quickly when an emergency arises. So again, you're in a tube of metal up 30,000 feet and something bad happens. You have this 500-page document to kind of whiz through to get you down. And some of it, there's steps. You see the different steps that each of these different emergency types have: an engine fire, total loss of thrust. There's a variety, but there's also memory steps, fortunately, where a pilot kind of has a few things to do really quick when something happens. And yet, before they actually have to land the plane, they have to go through quite a series of steps, and it actually takes a while to be able to prepare to actually get the plane on the ground. So talk about high stakes. It's really quite remarkable, and I find it quite fascinating. And so I use this story as our jumping off point for our conversation, at least whenever I'm speaking for the next little while. Bible principles for seeing through end-time propaganda, disinformation, and deception. And principles that we've learned already by looking at these Bible stories. We look at the story of Adam and Eve, and we learn that the different types of deception will exploit your senses, exploit your doubts, and exploit your ego. Those happened for Eve when she was tempted and ultimately failed the temptation in the Garden of Eden. Last time we talked about how the devil was tempting Jesus and how he was working to exploit the senses, questions, raise doubt, ego, and how deception works to exploit your faith. And all those things were done by the devil as he was tempting Jesus. And so today we're going to look at another story. Sometimes I find it helpful to take the same topic and push it through a variety of stories for us to gain the most insight that we can use to apply to our lives. Because that's the whole point. This isn't just something that's conceptual. Some of us may actually live in the end times. And so this would be something to kind of be in our wheelhouse and starting to think about. And so today we're looking at the story of Peter and the time that he disowned Jesus. And the reason I started with the story about that Southwest emergency landing was that as we go through this series, we want to be learning principles that we can learn for emergency preparedness. Because if you happen to be living in the end of days, which we read about many times in the Bible, these will be emergency times. These aren't going to be just ordinary times. And yet, ideally, as Christ followers, we want to be like Tammy Joe. We want to be as chill as possible, and that can only come through thinking ahead in emergency preparation, because the times that those times will be like will be bewildering. They'll be profoundly unique because there will be an emergency going on, but most people won't realize that or even acknowledge that there's an emergency going on, which will make it really kind of weird to work through as a Christ follower. And so that's why we're taking this journey through this topic, because the stakes are this. Because always the question, I work in marketing and sales, and a lot of times the question is, so what? So why are we going through all this? The point is, the stakes are real. We have the stakes of either life eternal or death eternal. When it all comes down to it, if you're one of those that are living in the final days of Earth's history, that the stakes are either life eternal or death eternal. There aren't like an option C. And so the stakes are real. And so that's why we're talking about this today, to make it become a little bit clearer, because growing up in the church and as an Adventist, I heard, you got to get ready, you got to get ready. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And so this is an attempt to try and put a little more meat on the bones, kind of make this a little more tangible, a little more realistic, something that we have to sit with and reflect on, should that be us at some point in our lives. And so let's pause real quick to invite our Maker into the mix. Father, we're exploring this topic, and there's no one more interested in us getting the point and not missing the point than you, and so we ask that you drive the point home in whatever way you need to. Please speak in spite of me, and yet allow us each to hear what we need to hear from you this morning. In your name, amen. All right, so we're going to be looking at Luke 22, 31 to 62. We won't go through the whole thing because then we'd be here for a long time. But I'm going to hit 3 snapshots of this story about Peter. You can go to it. I think it's still Lent. Anyhow, I mean, this is a journey that many Christians around the world are going through leading up to Christ's crucifixion, and there's a lot of conversation right now leading up to Easter. I believe Easter's next week, and so this is a big deal on the Christian calendar, and so we're parachuting into the story in the upper room. The disciples have met in the upper room, and so we're going to be looking at 3 quick snapshots in Luke 22, again, within the realm of 31 to 62. All right, so the first is the story where Jesus turns to Peter. He's in the upper room. The disciples have been bickering about who should be greatest, and Jesus knows what's about to happen hours away. And so he says this to Peter. He says, "Simon, Simon, Satan is determined to test your loyalty to me, and if possible, separate you from me like a farmer shakes his wheat to separate the kernels from the chaff. But I'm praying for you that your faith does not falter. After you survive the test and come back to me, you'll be able to inspire your brothers in the path." Now, Peter says, "Absolutely not. What are you talking about? I'm loyal to you. I'm ready to follow you to prison and to death." And Jesus said, "I want to tell you something, Peter. You are overconfident. That's your big problem. Before the rooster finishes crowing in the morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me." You can imagine how painful that was to have your only relationships on earth, to know that one was about to betray you and then another one was going to deny you. And yet he chose to continue going through with his mission. They go on to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says, "Look, guys, we're getting close to crunch time. You need to be praying. I'd love for you to be praying for me, but you need to be praying. It's like your top thing." Now, he probably understands what's going on better than they do. They've just been grumbling about who's going to be great someday. But he has a bigger picture, and so he goes to pray. But he says to them when they arrive, "You need to pray so you won't be overcome by temptation." After his prayer, he walks back. And he was, again, praying many hours that night. And he comes back to find them sleeping. He walked back to the disciples, and he hoped to find them in prayer, but instead they were sleeping, exhausted from sorrow. He woke them and said, "Why did you sleep when I needed you? You'd better get up and pray for yourselves so you won't fall prey to Satan." So it was switching gears, again, from praying for Jesus, bearing him up. Oftentimes we as a church family bear each other up because we believe there's power in prayer. Jesus underlines that, but he also turns the tables and say, now we're at a part where you need to be praying for yourself so you don't fall prey to Satan. Jumping ahead a few hours from the upper room where Peter had confidently said, "We'll do whatever it takes. We're not going anywhere. We're not leaving you." Most of the disciples had left by then, except Peter and maybe, I think there was one other, maybe 2 others there that had made it into the courtyard. Again, this is a AI rendition of what it was like. But the idea was this. The mob had been mistreating Jesus, and he was in the guardroom waiting his legal trial. It was good that the Jews followed the legal process for the sham that they were putting him through. But when the rooster crowed the second time, Jesus, and this is the only time in the Bible where it actually collects this thought, Jesus turned and connected eyes with Peter, and Peter instantly knew what he had done and what Jesus had told him hours before. Their eyes met. Peter remembered what Jesus had told him earlier that evening, before the rooster finishes crowing in the morning, "You will have denied knowing me 3 times." Peter ran from the courtyard back to the garden where Jesus had prayed, and there he fell into the ground and wept bitterly. Maybe it was starting to dawn to him what was going on. I think it was. Maybe some of the stories that Jesus had said were starting to make a little more sense. Probably not, though, if we follow what we understand in the Bible, how much they had missed of what Jesus was trying to tell them. And so as we think about this story, these snapshots of a matter of 10 hours or so, less maybe, probably more like 7 hours, let's think about insights that we can gain as we think about the macro picture that we're talking about, which is this idea of how to see through end-time deception, propaganda, disinformation. So, one insight that jumped out to me was a line that I read that says, in reality, you're probably closer to, I don't know that man, than you are, I will never leave you or forsake you. It's easy when things are good, and yet if Peter is any preview for us, it's easy for us to sit, with all our first world problems and the lives that we lead and think, oh yeah, we wouldn't do something like that. And yet how likely in reality we are to be more like, I don't know that man, than we are, I will never leave you or forsake you. We think that's what we would do, but there's oftentimes a difference between what you do, what you think you'll do, and what you'll actually do when you're in the situation. It's why I've kind of been building in this emergency preparedness, because you think about pilots when they're training, they go through an inane amount of training. So they'll actually do, in emergency, what they think they would do. Because if they didn't do the training, there's no telling what would happen when they were put in a catastrophic situation. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis that I thought was punchy. It kind of drives this point home, and it says, you never know how much you really believe anything until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death to you. As we're wrapping our minds around this idea, for those, if anyone of us are living in the end times, this quote may be a real preview. Because a lot of times it's easy to say, yes, I believe, and yet when it becomes a matter of life and death, it really becomes clear whether what you believe and what you don't believe. Next insight, we've been thinking about this idea of how deception, how propaganda is engineered to exploit. And so this deception will exploit our sleepiness. Drowsiness is hard. I drove to Tennessee. There was an accident on the road, so we got in late, much later than we thought we were going to. I had to do a lot of creative things to stay awake. But when you're exhausted, it's really hard to fight off the sleepiness. You've been there. You know what drowsiness kicks in at 2 a.m. and you're driving. It's not just physically, but spiritual exhaustion. Those are real things where you have fatigue, where you sometimes get to the point where you're just tired of praying because it just feels like there's an amounting list of things to pray about. It's real, not only physical fatigue, but spiritual fatigue as well. For those of you that know our family, Austin and Connor, our twins, went to Maine to practice medicine. They worked at a dental office, working in sterilizing equipment for a friend of ours that she has a dental practice, a significant dental practice up in Maine, and so they spent a year working in a dental office. And true to Austin and Connor fashion, they thought it was a neat idea to chronicle every morning they went to work. I would have thought of that. It's getting a little colder, and it's colder. They'll still wear shorts, but it's even when it's negative something or another. Day by day, by day, Austin demoing some ranch dressing. I wanted to show you this because while they were out there, they had the privilege of going on some trips up in the Northeast in Canada. They love Canada. And they were telling me when they were up there, Connor was driving, and it was Austin's job to keep him awake. And one of the tactics that they used that Connor asked Austin to do was to slap him when he was falling, when they were driving late, just to keep, when someone slaps you, it kind of wakes you up. And so I was trying, what pictures could I do to bring this mental image of Austin and Connor riding through the wilds of Canada, and Austin just whapping Connor every so often, prevent drowsiness, whatever it takes. It's a great mental image, though, of the feeling, if those of you have driven late, that it's almost overpowering, and yet it's that sleepiness that Satan was using to exploit for Peter during that time. Deception will exploit your prayer life. And the whole idea, we're more easily to fall prey to deception when we don't pray. We're dependent on knowing our guide's voice if we're wanting to survive the end, which is talked about so ominously in the Bible. I wanted to share you a story. I don't know if those of you any of you watched the Olympics, the Winter Olympics a few weeks ago? Anyone? All right, great. This will be an amazing story because no one. So anyhow, there was the Olympics, and then following the Olympics, there are the Paralympics, which actually aren't really televised unless you have Peacock streaming service. And so our kids are really into the Olympics. I am too. And so we watch the Olympics, but we also watch snapshots of the Paralympics. And I wanted to tell you a story because it just drives the point home of this idea of praying and trust. So this is Giacomo, and he has a guide named Andrea. They're from Italy, and he's a Paralympic skier with 5% vision. I don't know how to quantify 5% vision to you. I mean, close your eyes, that's 0%. So 5%, that's what he has. He was a silver medalist this year at Milano Cortina doing downhill speed skiing. There was a variety of ways. I think he actually won a number of medals. But I wanted to show you this in a second, Caleb. We'll cue it up. But there's a guide because Giacomo is blind. He has 5% vision. For those of you that ski, Brian, I know you ski, just imagine closing your eyes and going down the mountain. It sounds fun, doesn't it? The idea of doing that slowly is just amazing to think about, doing it at the fastest pace possible. And the way it works is they have a guide that is a few meters ahead. There's actually a girl this isn't her story, but there was a girl that's actually completely blind, and it was just terrifying to watch. But he has 5% vision, hurtling down a mountain, and the way they stay in contact is Andrea has an audio piece and basically can talk between each other, and he's telling Giacomo what to do next. And it's like 2-second delay. I mean, he's just that far ahead, and so you basically are following the voice of your guide down the mountain at breakneck speed. Go ahead and cue it up, Caleb. It's a minute, so it won't take long. It tells you how fast they go down the mountain. If you cue up the audio, maybe you can hear the guide. absolutely fascinating. Brian, I mean, you probably can ski that fast. Can you imagine doing that with your eyes closed? Yeah. I mean, that is just terror-inducing. You can go ahead, take it down. Fascinating story about trust, because there are ranges of sight. There's a brother and sister I was reading about from the United States. She has more sight, so she says she follows the orange blur, because her brother has a jacket on that's bright orange, so she has a little bit higher level of sight. He has 5%, so that's virtually nothing, hauling down a mountain. And then I watched a video of a guy that had zero sight, and it's purely going by audio. There's the audio, it's pure audio, that he has nothing to see. Talking about putting your trust in your guide, knowing your guide's voice enough that you would go down whatever percent slope that is at breakneck speed. That's trust, guys. That's the type of trust that prayer is talked about. This idea of connecting with God is, if you don't hear your voice, the voice of your guide, you're toast. Then you have a horrible wreck, and doing a horrible wreck blind, it would be terrifying. And so the idea that deception, like it did for the disciples, will also exploit your prayer life, and how prepared you are, how connected you are to your guide. The last piece, the last insight that I wanted to share, was the idea of deception will exploit your endurance. And at the end of that story, Peter goes and weeps at what he did for his master. He did the exact opposite of what he said he would do. And it's actually interesting because the parable of the foolish virgins kind of is talking about the same idea of the end, and it talks about how bitterly they weep when they miss out on eternity. Two different stories, but they're talking about the pain of loss, of missing out. And so we're going to jump real quick. You don't have to follow me here, but there's a little bit of a build on this that I wanted to do. When we started this series, we talked about Matthew, I think it was 24, where Jesus is talking about, previewing what the end will be like and what you can expect. There's a cousin to this right ahead of Luke 22. So it's almost the exact thing where Jesus is telling the disciples that the temple is going to be destroyed, and they're like, "You're kidding." And then they say, "This is what it's going to be like leading up to that." And then he goes on and tells them what it'll be like at the end of time. But here's what a couple of vignettes, some just snapshots of one point of the section of Luke 21. Jesus says, "You'll be hated everywhere because of me. These same things will happen to my people around the world right before the end." They were also talking about just before Jerusalem's fall. "But don't forget that not one hair on your head can be uprooted without your heavenly Father's permission. Remain faithful, and you'll receive eternal life." Now let's jump back to Matthew 24. We stopped there, and let's see what Matthew 24 said. It's basically, again, they're cousins. They're the exact same storyline. They're just different parts of the Bible. And what it says here is, "But those who stand firm until the end will be saved." The RSV says it this way, "But he who endures will be saved." The word endurance, I thought, was a great word for planning and thinking ahead to this season that Christ's followers will be in, because the challenge is, do you have enough endurance? This will be something that, I sometimes hear, I think I mentioned this a while back, but I was at a camp meeting a few years ago, and someone said, at the pulpit, they were saying, we'll see you next year unless Jesus comes first. And it sounds beautiful, but it's like, that'd be pretty tight time window. what if it drags on and on and on, and it requires endurance that no one expects that they would need to have? Because we would love to see, if you're living at that time, that this would be a very, very compressed time period. But what if it is delayed? The idea of endurance kind of bubbles up in this storyline. And so why will endurance be important? Why did that word kind of jump out to me? So we're going to jump to a completely different spot in John, but I thought it was interesting. This is where Jesus is talking about, he's being chased down by the religious leaders. And this is kind of telling a snapshot of what it's like as people are wrestling with a guy that heals and does amazing miracles. And it says the people were also looking him, Jesus. Some of the people said, he's a good man. Others said, he's an imposter going around deceiving people. This is about Jesus. Public opinion was divided. All this was taking place quietly because people are afraid to publicly say things one way or another about Jesus for the fear of the Jewish leaders. So why did I pick that? Because zooming back to where we started, it's possible, I think, as we think about the time of the end, that those living in that time will be bewildered the most, because not only will just the average, in our case, Americans, since we're Americans, probably be divided about what is going on, whatever is going on at that time, but there's a really good chance that Christians will be divided. And there's probably a pretty good chance that Adventists will be divided. And it'll be particularly painful because if everybody was on the same page, at least there's solidarity, at least you have each other. But if you have half the church believing one thing this morning and half of you believe the other, that's a new level of aloneness. And aloneness, especially spiritual aloneness, requires spiritual endurance. Those lines that Jesus was talking about in a variety of settings about what will be required at that time when all things come to an end. So, we're talking about Bible principles for seeing through end-time propaganda, disinformation, and deception. And we looked at the emergency preparation that goes in for a 737. Again, it's 500 pages worth of notes to help you have a quick handbook to land the plane as a pilot. And so what I was thinking is, what could be a quick reference handbook? What would be a checklist for Christ followers, if any of us are living at that time? What would be mindsets that we could have? What could be a kind of a tangible, practical way to say, to just like, well, how do you get ready for something like that? So one of the things we learned this morning from Peter is that one of the biggest things that Jesus called out, a blind spot of him, was he was overconfident. And it's not just Peter that is at risk for this. We're all at risk for being overconfident in general, but also overconfident spiritually, believing that we would for sure do one thing when it's very, very possible we would actually do another. And so thinking about this emergency preparation that pilots go through, thinking about how to take this story and what's a summary, what's one thing that we could kind of think about that kind of makes this practical, the idea of overcoming overconfidence, combating overconfidence on a daily basis, the idea of reminding ourselves every morning that we are closer to I don't know that man than we are I will never leave you or forsake you, that we are more like Peter than we'd probably like to believe. We're here this morning, and that's good. We get kudos for that. We're following Jesus, presumably. That's good. But there's also, I think, this story about Peter and this whole arc of stories of Eve Even the stories about Jesus being tempted by Satan shows the real risk that's constantly present when it comes to living in this world as a Christ follower. The idea of living every day with the spiritual self-confidence of a vision-impaired Olympic athlete that's hurtling down an icy mountain at 60 miles an hour. That's the kind of spiritual confidence this story is telling us that we should have. Jesus was telling Peter, you're overconfident. And through this story, he's giving us a hint that there's a possibility that we may have a little bit more spiritual self-confidence than we should. So what's the punchline? We've had accumulation of these. You remember this, maybe if you were here the first time, the idea of a life preserver in a boisterous sea. And the idea, this came from Ellen White, this story, these lines of many, even in their seasons of devotion, will fail at receiving the blessing of real communion with God. They are in too great haste. With hurried steps, they press through the circle of Christ's loving presence. That's the visual emblem is that life preserver. Pausing perhaps a moment within the sacred precincts, but not waiting for counsel. They have no time to remain with the divine teacher and with their burdens return to their work. What she's talking about is that skier, the blind skier, knowing and listening to their voice because they have no other choice. If they don't listen to their guide, they're crashing, and those crashes are quite catastrophic to watch. That's what we're doing. We're hurtling through life. The more we're close to the guide, as close as possible inside that center loop, that circle of that life preserver, the safer we are. The more attuned we are to knowing his voice, the safer we are as Christ followers. If we're farther away from that, we're farther away. It's just as catastrophic as if the guide gets well ahead of the skier. We talked about the metaphor from my morning jogs about the idea of running towards the sun and away from darkness. Another mental image as you go through the week is thinking about every morning, our life is dark. It can get dark, and sometimes it feels like it's even getting darker. Wake up every morning and intentionally think about what does it look like for me to run towards the sun. There's one other analogy that I thought of as I was thinking about running on Goddard Youth Camp Road and trying to keep from getting hit by David or Lanny. And it's true, people fly on that road. When I'm coming back, I run on the side of opposite side of the road, and so we live on this side. And so when I'm coming back the road, I cut across the road to our driveway. And I have a really bad habit of trusting my ears. I've listened, and I know what electric vehicles sound like, and I can hear them coming. There's enough road noise on our road that you can hear them. And so oftentimes I start making the cut across the road because I don't hear anything coming. Every now and then I look, and I also every now and then I think, that's really stupid. I should probably look. And yet, it's a metaphor to me and maybe to you that how much that we trust our senses. It's all those wonderful senses God has given us. Touch, smell, taste. And yet we see that some of these were exploited back with Eve and other times. And then we also read, as you read Matthew 24 and then Luke 21 and others, there's like 3 places or 4 where it gives a very clear picture of some of the things that may happen or will happen in the end, that there will be a time where you won't be able to trust your senses, where you won't be able to trust what you hear. You won't be able to trust what you see. That'll be really confounding. But that's what Jesus said is going to happen. I don't know what it'll be like. I can't tell you. But for those living at that time, it could be probably a pretty profoundly challenging time. And so when you get to that point, should you make it to that point, where you can't trust your senses, you can't trust your ears, you can't trust your eyes, even though they've helped you for many, many years, you can't necessarily trust what you're seeing, you'll want to be like that blind skier is depending solely on the voice of their guide. Because if you can't hear the voice of the guide, if you're living in that time, you're toast. Because you haven't built the connection that will be required to live through the absolute bewilderment that will take place for any Christ follower that's living in that season. So the reason we're talking about this today is it's germane not only to me, but it's germane to you. A good number of us may not live to that time. But if you do, I think there's a benefit to be thinking and preparing for tangibly, how do you stay connected to God? How do you stay in the circle of His loving presence? How do you run towards the light? And how more than anything do you make sure that you're well acquainted to His voice? Because the stakes are real. They're either eternal, it's either life eternal or death eternal. Those are the two options. There isn't a third. And the life eternal sounds pretty good. And so to gain the life eternal, know the voice as good as that skier does. And that's just one baby step towards eternal life. Father, the world, a good portion of the world is getting ready to celebrate Easter, a time when it reminds us that the reason that we have hope to live another day is because of your death, your decision to come to this earth and risk it all for us. You died and you were buried and you rose again, and because of that, we have hope. And yet you also tell us, it sounds like that the time of the end, whenever that happens, will require endurance, will require something that we don't have on our own. And the good news this morning is not only did you provide us a rescue plan through your death and resurrection, but you also provide the strength and the power and everything that we need to live a life as a Christ follower. And so we're thankful this morning that there's nothing that is required of us to do, to grit, to pull up our bootstraps, as much as just to follow your voice wherever it goes, to stay close in the middle of that ring, and to run towards the light, to place our lives completely in your hand and trust you completely. And so we choose to do that another week, and it's our privilege to do that this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. Have a blessed Sabbath. You're dismissed.